Andrew and Mark, thank you so much for that. Should we jump straight into the Q&A?
Yeah.
Brilliant. So, Julie asked, what was the one-day course that was mentioned at the beginning?
I wish I could remember the exact title. That's terrible.
Follow-up email, yeah?
Yeah, I'll follow it up in an email. Yeah, sorry, that's terrible.
It's the details of that course are on the APS website.
Yeah, I just can't remember what it's called. I know it's the course that I deliver, but I really can't remember it. I'll look it up. Well, let's you carry on.
Wonderful. Philip asks, I assume that building regulations duty holders only exist when the building regulations apply, but how does this affect competent person schemes? Is it possible that a scenario may exist where building regs does not apply, but CDM does?
I'm just trying to think of if there is a scenario.
There are lots of scenarios where CDM applies and building regs doesn't.
Yeah.
Lots of civil situations. There aren't any that I can think of where it works in reverse. So, but generally speaking, CDM will apply to all things to which building regulations apply, but not the other way around. So, and competent person schemes, if you're talking about government-approved competence person schemes rather than schemes that demonstrate competence, which is an entirely different thing, the government competent person schemes allows a client to choose a member of those schemes, and the person in the competent person scheme effectively signs off their own building work, compliance work, and provides a certificate to evidence it. It is interesting to note, though, is that for different reasons, although a certificate to evidence compliance is good for the client in one way, if you are working on, for instance, a hospital or a high-risk building, you might want more record information for your own benefits to be able to manage that property than is actually legally mandated. So you might think about, even though you as a member of a competent person scheme, they've signed it off, you might say, well, while I'm procuring it from you, I want a bit more information because I need that to understand my building. So I don't have gaps in the information where we've changed something and I don't have all the information I would particularly want myself.
Thank you. Lucy asks, if domestic client duties default away from the client to either PD, BR, or PC, who is responsible for signing the completion declaration on behalf of the domestic client? Try saying that 3 times fast.
It does, yeah. It doesn't default to the... Yeah, I suppose it does default. It potentially defaults to them. It's whoever's acting in the capacity of client. So it's PDB, but PD, PC, BR most likely, and possibly PD if they are brave enough to decide to act on behalf of the client as the client.
Thank you. Kevin asks, is the completion statement required by Regulation 16 for internal record purposes, or does this need to be issued to an external body?
No, it's part of the completion certificate. It's the declaration you make the regulator, or not the regulator, building control.
Thank you.
And actually, in the case of HRBs, the regulator.
Thank you. Rupert asks, can the client rely on professional service in compliance?
Don't understand the question. Say to me again.
Can the client rely on professional advice in a compliance?
I think we discussed this during the webinar to a certain extent. I think what was said was that the client has duties, and it is more or less implied within the regulations that there won't be a client advisor doing in place. But well, I've lost the question now.
I think I've thought about it. So it took me a while to process that in my head. The client needs to have the processes in place to provide the assurance to themselves. Just saying to somebody, "Have we complied?" and they go, "Yes, I think I'm a member of this, that, and the other. I think you've complied. That forget it. You'll both end up prosecuted, both the advisor and you will. It just doesn't. You've got to have the arrangements that provide the evidence to you to allow you to sign it.
Thank you. David asks, on Golden Thread, what does digital assurance record mean? Does it mean scope? What information is required to be gathered, supplied to the client for non-HRB projects? How different is this to the health and safety file O&Ms?
Very different than the it is. I've said digital assurance record. It's a phrase that I've coined, so I've made it up. But effectively, it's the evidence that demonstrate the building was designed and built in compliance with the relevant requirements of the building regulations. So it's a combination. It could be fire doors, certification of those fire doors, evidence that fire door was installed in an appropriate. So if it's a fire door, have you got evidence that it was installed in accordance with the relevant standard? Fire doors fail relating to that. And that could be the installation detail provided, and then signed off by the contractor to verify that was you need the door delivery installation information, the procurement information. You need perhaps photographic evidence. You need sign off by QA, and that's just relating to a fire door. So it's following that diagram that I suggested, and I suppose along with competence of the designer and the installer. It's that body of evidence that says this is what we designed and it's compliant, and here's the evidence. This is what we installed, and here is the evidence from beginning to end. And it relates to every requirement of the building regulations from A to S. I think that's the answer. Andrew, do you want to come in on that?
I was just going to add that, I mean, I think inevitably there will be overlaps between the health and safety file, O&M manuals, and the Golden Thread information. It's inevitable. I think the important thing is that, as should happen with the health and safety file, it should be clearly identifiable as a standalone or detachable document. So the same with the Golden Thread. It should be able to be a document that is able to be consulted and relates only to building regulation compliance. And it may well be that the three in certain projects would be gathered together. It may well be they'd be produced by different people as three separate documents. I do think there will be inevitably some overlap.
I think I've got a diagram here which I produced on Friday, which says at the core of everything is this building regulations compliance file 1. You've then got the CDM file, which contains unique information, but actually references that compliance file in some cases. You've then got the Reg 38 fire safety information, Reg 38 of the building regulations. There's a file relating to that. That has unique information, but references back again to building regulations compliance. And then third one is O&Ms, which relate to operation and maintenance, not about what's built. And that in itself, unique information about operating and maintenance, but referring back to some record information. So I think you have four files there that interconnect. The course is called Building Safety Act 2022, PD and PC New Requirements and Competence One Day. It's a horrible title, and I think we need to change it.
No comment. Thank you, John, as well. John Walton put that in the chat there for us. Simon asks, is it reasonable to expect a PD under CDM to advise the client that a PD under the building regs needs to be appointed where required? Should the CDM F10 form request the names of the PD/PC under the building regs if required?
No, the F10 has got nothing to do with building regs, so that just says what it says. But you have to think of one of the messages we give out in a lot of what we do. Was it last week we were doing a similar course? And we said that what you have to remember is a PD under CDM is the designer. PD under building regulations So under C, I get myself confused now. A
Can I come in
principal.
here?
Go
Yeah,
on,
carry on. You
David.
Okay.
help me.
The principal designer under CDM becomes a designer under the building regulations. And that's perhaps a subtlety that hasn't been realized generally by CDM PDs. That is the situation.
That's what I was going to say.
Thank you. And even you knew. I didn't. So bogged down in my own thoughts.
No worries. David asks, how is the building regulations PD role different from the lead designer role for HRBs and non-HRBs? What additional, goodness me, what additional activity is required?
There is no lead. It's sort of conflating a few things. There needs to be, as I said, Part 2A applies to HRBs as it does to non-HRBs. So all works which the building regulations apply. You need a principal designer, whether you're doing other sites of work.
Mhm.
Their duties are fundamentally the same, but they're working in a procedurally different environment. So you need additional duties, both relating to the complexities of a higher risk building, but also the procedural requirements of the building HRB procedures, England regulations 2023.
Thank you very much. Elspeth asks, Mark, you seem to refer to BRPD signing off designs. Is this correct? Whereabouts is this stated in the regulations? Shouldn't the designer evidence a QA process of their design, which includes compliance with relevance requirements?
It's a lazy shorthand on my behalf, but in effect, they are the ones that brings the design together and ensures its compliance. So when I'm saying signing off, it's a lazy shorthand, and I apologise for that. Andrew, do you want to?
No, I think that's fair enough. I think signing off is not the way it would really work. The PD's got to, the building regulations has got to know enough about other designers' work to be able to say that it is compliant, or they say to the PDBR it is compliant, and the PDBR has sufficient evidence to support that statement by the other designer. And as a designer on the project themselves, they will be able to obviously assure that their own designs are compliant.
Excellent. The next question is from William. Legislation leads to the architect undertaking the BRPD role. However, we keep finding architects are not prepared to undertake the role. How are clients to approach appointments if the architect is not prepared to undertake the role?
I would suggest appoint another architect.
That's easy, sorted.
It's really interesting is that they have been doing the role for years. They've been signing up to contracts that makes them responsible for building regulations compliance, and I've seen those contracts. And there was one particularly, I was working in an HRB recently, and I put this point to the client that actually, what's the difference between contractual responsibility and criminally liable? They're the same things. Why don't you know? And they put it to the designer, who realized they were going to lose the contract, and went, yes, all right, we'll do it.
Yep. Threats always works. Sam asks, does the APS PD register access? I'm so sorry, I'm going to start again. Does the APS PD register assess organizational capability? If not, does the client have to do an additional organizational capability assessment when appointing anyone from the register?
The PD register is for assessing, or the scheme assesses individual competence, and it doesn't assess organizational capability. Mark described that earlier. The client obviously has to make all reasonable inquiries regarding the capability of organizations they wish to employ. Where the PD register comes in is the organization can say that it has within the organization a member of staff who has been assessed as competent.
Thank
And
you.
organisational capability coming back is management of competence. Is making sure that they have enough people across the piece. So that principal designer in isolation has enough broad knowledge, but the project might need specialist fire safety knowledge, special structural knowledge, special CDM knowledge, and it's bringing that together as the organisational pieces to make sure that there are enough people, and they don't work in isolation. So it's that broader piece. And yes, strictly speaking, you need to ask organisations to demonstrate their organisational capability. But the other caveat I would put on all of this, and I know we've run out of time, is that we are changing the world here. We are, and there is discussions that, we're talking 5 years minimum to get to some of the basic standards, and probably 30 years before we get a competent construction industry. This is a really big change, and I don't think that I've heard the BSR say we're going to be pragmatic, but then if something goes wrong, you need to buy a different standard will apply. Well, hang on a sec, that doesn't work. But we need to accept that this can't happen overnight. This is too big a change. You need to work towards it and work towards it fast, focusing on where the risk lies, focusing on those roles where there are the biggest risks. And I think starting with accreditation of the PD building regs is a really good place. If you've got somebody within the organisation that knows what they're talking about and knows what the new requirements are, you're heading in the right direction.
Thank you. Andrew asks, I've been working as the lead principal designer, CDM, since 2015 with a large executive architects practice. Prior to that as a CDMC. I've got no formal designer qualifications, but I work very closely with the design team, client and building control. Would I be eligible to register for BSR PD? I've been tracking the BSA since the draft bill was released, and I've also set up a working group within our practice specifically for BSA, attended the RIBA course and many others. In your view, would I be deemed as competent?
Well, the answer to that, Andrew, is that we have an application process, and if you can provide sufficient response to, for example, the narrative description of your background, skills, etc., against PAS 8671 criteria, and have evidence to show that you're actually doing or managing building regulations and building control, and our assessors assess you as competent, then that will be the case. I can't say without seeing any evidence, though, at this point in time. But in principle, yes, please apply.
So we like to hear.
Every time Andrew says that, that's the nub of it. Are you doing this? Are you managing building regulations on a project? Yes or no? If you are or have, then you might meet the criteria. If you never have, unlikely.
Bryn asks, would a purely fit out / refurb of an individual shop unit at ground floor level, which has residential units above, so the unit is within a building, think of a Tesco Metro below some apartments, which meets the HRB criteria, would it be classed as a HRB project?
It's really interesting. Possibly not. The building descriptions, the HRB descriptions and supplementary provisions regulations, you need to read those and look at them, because there are some situations where it depends whether the access is shared or not shared, and whether it's an independent section, and all of those things apply, and there will be situations where it might be, and there'll be situations where it won't be.
Thank you so much. How does building safety regulations impact fire policy? That's the question.
An interesting something,
Well,
but
actually, we'll be doing fire policy in a couple of weeks, aren't we?
Yeah, so there are. It is a component. Part B is a requirement of the One thing that is interesting for all of you is the new fire risk assessor competency standards will apply to construction. Take that away and think about what that means for fire risk assessments on construction projects.
Richard asks, is the answer not that the roles, etc., only apply at works requiring building regulation approval applies? I don't think that makes sense. Richard, do you want to give that one another? Yeah, Richard,
I'm not sure what it means, Tony.
Sorry, Andrew?
I'm not sure what that question
Yeah.
actually is.
Okay, we'll leave that one. And Richard, if you want to just rewrite that, that'd be fantastic. Martin asks, how do you discharge your duties as PD building regs where you have simply provided plans for a domestic client to approach a builder direct and manage direct?
Well, I think the answer here is one that I've given many times to similar questions. If your appointment terminates, you just have to make sure that everything about the appointment and the role terminates with it. You then, depending on the type of project, the question, Martin, you don't say whether it's domestic or non-domestic, but you should certainly say to your client, "I've now finished with this role. You must then," or you just say it's domestic client. You must then make suitable arrangements with whomsoever you decide to appoint.
Brilliant. Sean asks, Sean just commented, the course is just what you've been looking for. So thank you very much, Sean. That's very kind of you. Robert Cosmo asks, yeah, there we go. Look at us. We're doing well. We should be proud of ourselves, guys. Let's have a little moment for us. Robert asks, who should be advising the client how to check and quantify competence?
It comes around to that thing that Andrew and I were talking about right at the beginning, is that the designer and contractor must not carry out the work until the client's aware of their duties. And they can sit there saying, "Are you aware of the duty?" And the client goes, "No." And they say, "Well, we're not going to start then, are we? Because you're not aware of the duties. And so we'll sit here and we'll wait till somehow the impasse breaks." Or you could say to a client, "Do you know what? Are you aware of duties?" "No." "Well, it looks like this. Can I point you in the right direction to APS or somebody else who can give you a bit more detail if you want that, or I'll support you and make sure you're compliant, and then we can all get going." So that's what Andrew was alluding to. It's implied, because otherwise you're all going to sit there and look at each other and wait till the client decides they're going to do something to. So what are my duties? Well, now you've asked, I can tell you, and I'll charge you for it.
David asks, how is the reply about digital records different from the HRB records? They sound the same.
They are. I'm just saying that everybody says golden thread relates to HRBs. I can't see how you can evidence compliance over an extended period of time should something go wrong if you don't keep a very similar set of records. Strictly speaking, though, if you look at the HRB requirements, there are some particular requirements relating to, for instance, mandatory occurrence reporting, various other things. But in the round, in principle, if you take the objectives of the golden thread, it's the same.
Elspeth says, you commented, the CDM PD becomes a designer under the BR. Could you explain that a bit further, please?
They are a designer, and therefore, because they are a designer, where the building regulations apply, they will have duties under the building regs. So if the bit that's the most obvious, if you're dealing with something relating to Part K, falls and falling objects, if you're giving advice upon under Part K, access to plants on a mezzanine level, you need to be absolutely sure what Part K requires, because at the very least, you need to be able to agree with the PD under building regulations what the solution is. So you're coming in it from one way, they're coming in it from another, and you need to understand, both need to understand each other's requirements to be able to achieve a compliant solution that complies with the building regulations. But you are a designer under the building regulations because you're a designer.
Stephen asks, if you are employed as principal designer BR for the initial design, but not employed during or after construction, you obviously wouldn't sign off the completed works as you were not involved. What does the client do then?
You need to make sure personally that you have adequate arrangements to pass over sufficient information with that design, which is part of your duties. So that it's very clear where the battery limits, where are the boundaries of what you did, and you've got clear evidence that what you did was compliant. So it is really important that you hand over. And there's also a requirement, although we haven't covered it today, of providing that adequate information to the next PD. We necessarily could only cover 45 minutes of information, and we struggle to get all the information over in a day. So you can see we've compressed what we're talking about today.
Thank you. Aaron asks, how do you notify HSE with regards to BSR?
You don't. It's a building control. So if it's an HRB, the application goes to the BSR. In every other case, it goes to whoever's dealing with building control. So that could be a registered building control provider or could be local authority.
Thank
or
you.
A notification.
Darren makes a comment, but also a little question. Darren's been dealing with building regulations for 40 years in all of his projects. He's pretty good with them, as well as being an energy assessor. But he feels like he's going to be prevented from doing so in the future because of all these registers. He works on his own, and all of this is so time-consuming. Do you have any thoughts on this?
It's a massive change in the industry and was brought about by the failures in Grenfell. It just is where it is, and there are lots of people coming to the latter part of their career saying, trying to upskill to meet these requirements is just too much. And I talking to my colleague the other day, he said, "Oh, I'm so pleased I'm the one setting the rules and not complying with the rules. This is really not easy." And that's just how it is, but it is how it is.
Yeah, I think the answer to Darren's question is that your clients, Darren, will determine whether or not you need to be on a register, or whether they're satisfied, having taken all reasonable steps, bearing in mind what you say about your experience, to establish that you are in fact competent.
It's a bit moot, you see, because I sort of take one to mean the other. It is that if you've got the skills, knowledge, experience, and behaviours to get on a register, there is effort to do that. But in any other case, you have a statutory duty to ensure you're competent. So you're going to need to go through the process to validate to yourself that you meet the compliance. And you're going to, at some point, have to demonstrate to a client. So whether you're on a register or not, you still need to go through the process. So you might as well apply for something and get somebody else to say you meet the requirements and then you've done it once, or because you're going to have to do it anyway.
We've only got 3 more questions for everyone that has to leave for meetings or you've just overrun. This is going to be recorded and it's going to be on YouTube for free. So all the Q&As will be on YouTube for free moving forward. Emmanuel says, asks, does the requirement for a PDBR now lend towards organisations as opposed to individuals delivering the roles of PD, CDM and BDBR? Is there a reasonable potential of an individual able to meet the competence requirements for both roles?
Andrew's looking at me saying, I'm going to open my mouth. I will. I think the BSR, who oversee all of building regulations, as well as being the building regulator for, the building control authority for HRBs, is saying that they see this as an organisational role. In many, almost cases, this is an organisational role because it's more than just having somebody in the middle who knows enough. It's all the supporting act that goes with it. But there will be cases on small extensions where it'll still be appropriate. Andrew,
Yeah, I think that's right. It very much depends on the size and scope of the project. It's perfectly possible to have building regulation experience and also have sufficient CDM background knowledge and experience to do both on a manageable project. But it's whether or not the work is manageable for, in this case, as the question relates to an individual doing both roles, is it manageable within your workload? Can you do both? Can you do them both properly and satisfactorily and competently? Yeah, in principle, that should be okay, I would say.
Comment from Danny Kumba there for Darren and Dan, if you want to look in the chat. That's very kind of you, Danny. I would look in the chat there. I'm not going to read it out. So John has asked, has anyone got a copy of the construction control plan? He can't find one anywhere. So is that something that we can possibly send out afterwards?
Now, I will tell you something. I say this so often. You start with the procedure, you start with the processes, and when you've got the processes that deliver, write it down. You then have a construction control plan. Same with anything of these arrangements. The BSR is really anti-templates. Personally, I'm really anti-templates, because if you sit down and work out what the process is, and a process that works for your organization, that integrates with your digital management systems and anything else, you'll come to the right answer. If you fill a form out, all you get is a piece of paper. Sorry,
I was just going to say there won't be one size fits all, and therefore producing a template to suit all circumstances would be virtually impossible. As Mark says, you build what you need in the construction control plan from the processes involved.
Okay, we're going on our last two questions. So Richard, who asked the question earlier, we couldn't quite grasp. His earlier query was a comment on an earlier discussion concerning whether the PDBR role applies. He's assuming that the role only applies if building regulation approval is required. Correct. Not correct.
Well, I think the answer to that is where building control is required, then the appointments are required. And I think we said that earlier in various different ways, but I think that's the answer to this question.
Thank you so much. And then the final question, David asks, if it is organizational, and I agree, then it's, hang on. If it is organizational, and I agree, then it's a team effort to competence. How do individuals fulfill the requirements on their own?
You need a designated. The trouble is, because this is client's requirements, and we try to compress things. So you need a designated individual. Designated individual within a PD or PC is there where it is an organization, needs to be a designated individual. They are there to manage the organization to achieve competence throughout. I would see that the PD building regs under is more faced towards that designated individual. They may be suitable with some other skills to be that designated individual to make sure the organization has got what it needs to be able to deliver as an organization. It's not a strict crossover, but when we were working on 8671, it was a very clear, and I think if you look at the details of 8671, they're talking about the designated individual competence being aligned with the individual PD requirements.